AHHctober's greetings. I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, with a review of the latest Saw film in theaters now. Socks, or Saw X, or Saw 10, whatever you call it, it's the 10th entry in the Saw franchise, and I'm gonna answer your question right now. No, Saw X doesn't take place in space, but it does take place in a far more frightening, desolate, and isolated place. Mexico!
Outside Mexico City, the results have been stunning.
They should have called this Saw Mex.
I still have a lot of work that needs to be done.
Now, I've seen all the Saw movies except Spiral because books are for nerds, but I'm not really a fan of the Saw series. I didn't watch them until a few years ago because I just wasn't interested in their premise, but after finally watching most of the movies, I found them for the most part entertaining. They're just not really my kind of thing, and I really dislike the series' complicated continuity and overuse of flashbacks to tell its stories.
Hello, Agent Perez, and welcome to the world that you have long studied.
So I was really on the fence about even going out of my way to see Saw 10 in theaters, but you know, my other bigger October vids are still cooking, so I needed something for the first day of October, so I figured, alright, let's give Saw 10 a shot. And I'm glad I did because it's a good movie. Not just a good Saw movie, but a pretty good movie in general. I was honestly shocked too as I was watching the film. Let me explain why it's so good in my review of Saw 10. But first, I have a message from my sponsor, me. Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested, and I thank you in advance.
And if you can't handle this, how will you handle the rest of our work?
The previous two Saw movies tried to find ways to continue the series after the events of Saw 3D, but Saw 10 goes another way as an interquel. It takes place between the events of Saw 1 and Saw 2. Why? Well, if you're unfamiliar with the Saw series, John Kramer, aka Jigsaw, is a guy with brain cancer who puts shitty people in death traps to make them hopefully get their lives back on track. Kramer dies very early in the Saw franchise, though, but not from his cancer, by getting his fucking throat slashed in Saw 3, which was intended to be the end of the series, but then they made 7 more movies, and in order to get around Jigsaw's death, the series had to resort to using flashbacks or recordings of him before he died in order to keep Jigsaw around after he died. The sequels after 3 took a nosedive without the original Jigsaw at the center, directly involved in the stories. Saw 10 realizes this and gets around the sequels by just being the first sequel chronologically. But this isn't a requel thing where all the other sequels didn't happen. Saw 10 doesn't disregard the other sequels telling a plot where the other movies can't happen. The other movies still happen, they just haven't happened yet. But the movie has a certain character appear in it that makes it obvious that the later Saw movies are definitely canon.
You will want to remain alert.
Saw 10, taking place between the events of the original movie and the second film, is freeing for the franchise because it was so stifled by heavy amounts of continuity that made the series' storyline near impenetrable to casual viewers. I've seen the original 7 Saw movies twice and I still don't fucking understand what happened in them. With Saw 10, though, you don't really need to see any of the Saw movies besides the first, and maybe the second and third films, but all you really need to know is Jigsaw is a guy with cancer who puts people in traps.
I've had my eyes on you, and I do not like what I see.
Saw 10 not only sidesteps the series' confusing continuity, it also sidesteps another issue that came with the franchise's muddled timeline. Saw 10 tells a linear story. There are no flashbacks to shit that happened months or years before the movie's events happen, and there are no confusing subplots that happen incongruously with the main narrative. Saw 10 tells a focused story told in order, and with how confusing the story of the Saw movies could be, this alone is a serious breath of fresh air. Any flashbacks that do happen in Saw 10 just offer additional context to things that happened earlier in the movie.
Please, don't hesitate.
What's the non-confusing story of Saw 10, though? John Kramer, played by Tobin Bell, is still dying of terminal brain cancer when he finds out an acquaintance from a cancer support group John attended has been miraculously cured of his affliction, and John is interested.
I'm afraid there's nothing else we can do. There is one person who might be able to help.
The cure involves a mixture of radical experimental surgery and a drug cocktail, but it apparently gets the job done. The treatment isn't endorsed by the FDA or any other oversight committees, effectively making it illegal, which means the only place where John can have the treatment performed on him is in the one place where dangerous illegal surgery isn't frowned upon: Mexico!
She saved my life.
The early scenes of Saw 10 are all about John Kramer's life dealing with his cancer and finding hope in his new treatment. The only indication John's begun his deadly crusade is a scene where he sees a hospital janitor about to steal from a patient, and John imagines putting the janitor into a machine that will suck his eyes out and break his fingers. Whether or not the trap actually happened or not is ambiguous, though. The point is, Saw 10 takes place chiefly from John Kramer's perspective as a possibly unreliable narrator, focusing on his quieter moments starting out, painting him as a tragic figure, using his plight as a way to make him sympathetic, instead of just using it as a motivation for his bloodshed. The Saw movies before generally had lots of John Kramer, but none of the movies took place purely from his perspective before.
The tumor was never removed.
How much time do I have?
John Kramer inevitably discovers that his cancer treatment was not actually real. It was an elaborate scam, and Jigsaw, despite being a master criminal, got scammed himself, and he seeks swift vengeance against those responsible. Chief among them is Dr. Peterson. But Kramer isn't working alone. He has help from his apprentice, Amanda Young, who ironically looks kinda old.
Sometimes we get sucked into things that are against our nature.
Yeah, bringing the 81-year-old Tobin Bell back for a movie that takes place 20 years in the past works okay because he was already an old man with cancer, but bringing back Amanda, played by Shawnee Smith, playing a character 20 years younger than she is right now, doesn't quite work as well. Shawnee Smith looks great today, but she still looks older than she does in Saw 2. I guess maybe it doesn't help that they gave Amanda a fuck-ass haircut that makes her look like Mr. Spock. Still, even if it doesn't work 100% well continuity-wise, having Amanda back is nice. The dynamic between her and John Kramer was interesting, but the movies didn't offer much time to explore their relationship before they both died in the third movie. If Saw 10 is the start of a series of Saw movies that take place between 1 and 2, it can really make up for a lot of missed opportunities from the original sequels.
Drugs are as vicious as they are powerful.
Saw 10's story is straightforward and honestly pretty cliched, admittedly. It's kinda similar to Saw 6, where Jigsaw was getting revenge against an insurance company. It's just he's getting revenge against a scam artist doctor and her Mexican cronies. But what makes Saw 10's narrative interesting is John Kramer. We get an unprecedented level of access to him. Jigsaw has more screen time in Saw 10 than he possibly has in all the other Saw films put together. I might be exaggerating here, but Saw 10 is 2 hours, and John Kramer is in nearly every scene. We get a lot of him, and we get a lot of characters for him to bounce off of in his control room and share his insights into life. The philosophy behind what Jigsaw does. It's pretty engaging, even when he isn't putting dudes in death traps. John Kramer, unlike all of the previous movies, is the protagonist of Saw 10. He's an anti-hero. He's been wronged, and he's carrying out justice against those who wronged him in a morally questionable way. But you can sympathize with the why behind it. Dr. Peterson, despite being put into a death trap she has to escape, is the villain, and she deserves punishment after robbing so many people desperate for a cure. It becomes questionable when John Kramer puts Peterson's Mexican cohorts in the same position as her, though. They're struggling through their lives, but there are better ways to make money than helping to scam people with cancer, so Peterson's cronies aren't exactly innocent either. How Jigsaw carries out his vengeance is questionable, especially in how fair it can possibly be. Jigsaw claims to be playing a game with his victims, but, you know, conventional games are play-tested to determine that they are winnable. But with Kramer's death traps, there's no way to really test them on somebody first, and John definitely doesn't try them out before unleashing them on people. And the people John sometimes preys on aren't really bad, just troubled. The morality and contradictions behind Jigsaw are explored in Saw 10, though.
We all have free will. Gabriella had her own free will.
But in addition to that, there are plenty of cool traps in the movie, too. It might not sound like it, but there are. It's just that it's pretty remarkable that a Saw movie has an engaging narrative to it besides just cool traps. Saw 10 even figured out a way to create stakes in the plot of a prequel when you already know characters survive.
Place a big enough piece of your cerebral tissue into the glass enzyme tank.
Anyway, I really like Saw 10. It felt like a step in the right direction for the series, but I do have some issues. It's got some cheesy moments and dialogue, and even though it isn't abundant with the goofy editing flourishes of the earlier Saw films, it's still directed by Kevin Grudert, who edited most of the Saw movies, so it still has some of the distracting fast motion and quick cutting here and there. Saw 10 is good though. It's a refreshingly quieter, more contemplative Saw movie about its villain reflecting on his own morality and mortality, while still setting some cool-ass traps. I give Saw 10 a confusing timeline out of Amanda's confusing haircut.
This is not retribution. It's a reawakening.
It's gotta be rough being John Kramer. He's been dying of cancer for 20 years now. If you liked this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. I'd also like to thank these fine folks pledged my shout-out tier on Patreon for all their kind support. Videos like this wouldn't be possible without all their help. Thank you for watching, see you next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.